Inefficiency, waste of time, and loss of productivity has been one of the longest standing concerns about overload. The validity and seriousness of these concerns is a matter of debate. Welcome to a new episode of Information, Social Media, Internet, Online Connections, and more. More than an episode, this is a new video. So let's talk about inefficiency on these aspects. There is a concern that the availability of information and communication sources leads to an inability to focus or concentrate. A state term continuous partial attention. This has led to a number of commentators to bemoan the increasing superficial way in information and knowledge is handled. Carr in 2010 is one early and well published example. It is alleged that deep engagement with information and knowledge, reading a book from start to finish, for example, has been largely supplanted by a scanning of snips. Articles are supplanted by blog postings, and blog postings are supplanted by tweets. So now we tend to just make information like shorter and also with this cues that is like better digestible for other people. So the people are not going to read the entire scientific article, right? But what about if they just take like the summarized parts of it? Same with the books. What if we only put like the main points of each book into people to read it? Will people be reading the entire book itself? Because I think that it is important to acknowledge that different parts of the books are going to mean different for each one of us. So if we put someone or something to pull out a summary of the book with important parts, are just going to be the important parts of each one of us. Perhaps something that we read about the book wasn't something that was useful for someone else, but for us, a sentence, a paragraph, an entire chapter. So what is going to be meaningful for us? It depends on singularity. Singularity depending on each individual. So when you're reading a summary, it's just like, yes, this is useful, but for what purpose? Always ask that. For what purpose is this summary useful? So now we just want to read everything faster and not to think too much. As I was commenting on my previous video, it is like Instagram comments. Now you are able to see someone saying like, hey, this is like too much information, as a response of a commentary that was apparently too long for the person to read. So too much information. It's just an Instagram comment. Now imagine just putting that person to read a newspaper every day. Too much information. Too much information. Too much information, right? Certainly, more reliance is placed by academic and professional readers on abstracts and summaries, as opposed to a reading of the full document. See, for example, Nicholas Huntington and Jamalin 2007. Whilst a reasonable and long-standing way of copying of an excessive number of potential useful things to read, this is potentially troubling, as the studies have shown that typically 20% of abstracts contain significant inaccuracies. usually presenting the subject matter of the main document in an unreasonably positive light. The same must surely be true of policymakers and administrators. And on the opposite of what I was mentioning before, it's just that how many books have been published lately? How many books are published per year? And just about books. Now, how many tweets we have per year? How many Instagram posts we have per year? How many magazines, publications we have per year? How many scientific articles we have per year? And how many of all of that is actually debunking and trying to tell something opposite and trying to actually just to debunk the other one that also was published on the same year at the same time. So we are contradicting each other, but at the same time, we are publishing an enormous amount of things at the same time. So when I read something, it is more likely for next week or already on the previous week to have like 3 more documents already. I say like, hey, what you read isn't true. What you read has inconsistencies. What you read might be not something 100% accurate. And even the debunking document can be not 100% accurate. And it's like a vicious cycle sometimes that we're like on this overload of information and debunking until like, hey, this is my truth, this is my other truth. And then we have the tweet that says like, hey, this is my theory that isn't based on everything, but people are starting like to engage in that tweet, and now you have like a new idea in your head, and now you're seeking for more information, trying to debunk that one, and we will never end. But what about misinformation and fake news? Harari in 2017 said the following: in the past, censorship worked by blocking the flow of information. In the 21st century, censorship works by flooding people with irrelevant information. We just don't know what to pay attention to, and often spend our time investigating and debating side issues. In ancient times, having power meant having access to data. Today, having power means knowing what to ignore. And I mentioned this fragment in the past because I think it's really, really important. The academics, religious people, people of the court had access to books, and they maintained their power by letting the rest of their people not knowing what was going on. So it was like a useful tool for maintaining power, for manipulating masses, and so on. But now hmm, we have, or better said, after the discovery of machines that could copy, and of course, we could make like large amounts of copy and a minimum amount of time for all the people to read. Now information was accessible to everyone. But do we have the educational basis to digest that information already? We're competing with academics that knew how to process and how to develop information themselves through years and years of studies. And now everybody was able to have a piece of paper with notes and information in it without that academic background. It's not that no, not everyone is allowed to read. It's like not everyone has the basis to understand information, like the large amount of information, especially that we have nowadays. And I can include like all of us. Even the academics nowadays, they have like an enormous amount of articles. They won't be able to be up to date even if they just keep reading every single day, as probably most of them already do. It's not possible to be up to date with everything, even in a specific area or subject. Arguably, the main difference between the influence of overload in the 21st century and in previous times is the way in which overload is now perceived to cause problems for social cohesion and political action, including loss of social media cohesion, political polarization, and loss of vitality of the public sphere. We're talking about also censorship, and it's been it's been like more difficult to do that with our access of information nowadays. So censorship is still a mechanism in order to limit information to masses of people. Do are you okay with censorship or not? To be included as a way of limiting information nowadays. Let me know. There is a particular issue with people finding reliable information from news sources. When there are so many more reliant social media sources, many of dubious validity, competing for the limited time and attention of their users, we can now have like a TikToker sharing the daily news on a periodically basis, and we are going to just follow that person because that person is going to show us information in a digestible way. We don't have to read, we don't have to investigate, and it's easier to follow that person instead of us navigating and confronting like the information and the data he's giving us. So it's easier for us to just click on a video, 1 minute video, and we can now say that we are up to date. So even the skills of investigating and actually comparing information, we are losing that. We are losing our analytics skills. It's not only about the lack of concentration and attention focus that we're losing, also our analytics skills. Like back in the day, how many of you made a thesis? And now with introduction with ChatGPT, if you have been using that, how many of you are able to replicate that in the same amount of time and in the same way that you did on those previous years? How many of you are able to do that again, to replicate it without any AI help, just manually as you did in the past? And with the same amount of effort and quality as you did in the past. If you made like a great thesis or if you were able to graduate with that and you think like, yes, it was a decent thesis. Because I remember I saw like a video, I watched a video of someone that says like, hey, now I think it is like impossible to do that again for some reason. And I realized I'm in today with other things thinking for us and other like analyzing the stuff for us that I don't think I'm able to do that anymore. Or they just have it though, like, how did I do that? How did I even do that? Even asking ChatGPT to write an email is like, how did I just write so many emails at the back? It's like now it's not something like we can have it on a plausible sphere as we did in the past. And it's just like, yes, we're able to do that if we did in the past. And now why is that possibility so distant? We already talked in the past that there's like no cure for information overload. But what about two general pragmatic strategies for coping with information overload? Filtering information and avoiding or withdrawing from information. Taken together, this may be regarded as a satisfying strategy, although this is treated by some writers as a distinct third approach. Mannheim in 2014 argues that all three may be seen as a kind of non seeking for information. Certainly, they are used for the most part instinctively and not by the unconscious strategy formulation. For overviews of copying strategies, you can also see other authors such as Bodden and Robinson, Mannheim, and Johnson Kelly. Avoiding and withdrawing. The rather crude heuristic of information avoidance relies on simply ignoring potentially useful information and sources of information, either because there is just too much to deal with, or just because it is incongruent, difficult to fit with the user's existing knowledge. We can point out that avoidance or escape may be a perfectly rational response to overload if one cannot make any use of the information obtained. Mannheim in 2014 somewhat similarly argues that not seeking for information may be perfectly reasonably course of action in some circumstances and will certainly prevent or at least minimize overload. However, more negatively, avoiding discordant information, which can lead to escaping, seeking simple solutions to complex issues by avoiding information which may be challenging or unsettling. We have like an example of when we don't want to see more news because we think it's too negative and it's affecting our mental health. Avoidance can become a habit and in the long term might not be like really positive for us, or perhaps yes, but that's an example. Do you think this can be like more negatives for us in the long term, or is it still something that it's a possible escape and positives for us if we integrate it as a habit? The avoidance of modern news. Information withdrawal, a conscious decisions to keep to a minimum the number of resources to be considered, ideally combined with the filtering of intake and rapid weeding of relevant material of limited usefulness. This strategy has been noted by other researchers, and also it could be like a more plausible approach, focusing on information that can match our own ideas and ideologies. Example of withdrawal are customizing social media to limit the number of notifications received, unfriending or unfollowing social media accounts, turning off mobile devices or ignoring email or social media for a period, focusing solely on information matching existing knowledge, or frame of reference, leaving a social media platform entirely. But what about filtering? Filtering, understood as leaving certain types of information unprocessed, appears to have first been mentioned by Miller in 1962 and is one of the most frequently observed ways of reducing overload. Also, it can be identified filtering as a valuable mechanism for reducing overload. It is also notated as a filtering strategy as a way of discipline and systematic attempt to focus on relevant information from chosen sources by specifying criteria for immediately removing items from consideration. These criteria will necessarily be different for each source and may be applied intellectually or based on the algorithm. We also identify filtering as a major strategy for avoiding overload. The behavioral decision theory literature, in essence, also assumes that decision makers do not consider everything in making choices. Filters determine whether information is relevant to a user according to some scheme of importance priority, and without information presumed to be irrelevant or of less importance. The intention is to draw attention to the most valuable or interesting information and hence use time with necessarily limited more effectively. It may involve a variety of processes for selecting or ranking information. A distinction is sometimes made between active filtering, seeking useful information and drawing it to the user's attention, and passive filtering, omitting less useful material from that presented to a user. Filtering may be done automatically on the basis of explicitly asking for user preferences. It may be also done by the algorithm, by simple means such as by noting what kinds of emails messages are deleted and read, or by more complex means using techniques such as machine learning, For examples of the latter, you can see Jones and Kelly in 2018, what they wrote about it. It can be archived by means of organizational procedures. Elite politicians, for example, were noted to filter incoming information through procedures and the use of assistants as information intermediaries. Filtering is always a trade off. It helps reduce overload by allowing users to concentrate on useful information, but may cause them to miss encounters with novel information and may discourage exploration. There is also an ethical question about who or what is controlling what information a user sees. An antidote to this may be to ensure that filtering is always done transparently, and examples of filtering are ignoring emails and social media notifications for certain people and about certain topics, unfollowing accounts on social media, examining only the most recent or the most relevant items from a long list, and examining only items in languages in which one is fluent, rather than seeking a translation for others. But we are going to continue with satisficing. Satisficing, also term bounding rationality, is a way of making decisions and choices when it's not feasible to fully compare the benefits of possible options. In essence, a way of efficiently getting something that, while not necessarily optimal, is good enough for the purpose. In the information context, provided that there is a good rationale for the decisions made, this can be a good heuristic for getting good enough information without being overloaded. Indeed, such behavior, often quite sophisticated and usually involving withdrawing and filtering approaches, is commonly observed. It is sometimes clearly the predominant means of avoiding overload, as with the Belgian politicians studied by Walgrave and his partner I cannot pronounce in 2017. It is often suggested that satisficing it is an expression of SIP's principle of the least effort. But Mannheim produces examples to show that this may not always be so. People do not always follow, in information terms, the path of least effort. Bowden and Robinson in 2009 distinguished good satisficing from bad satisficing. The former requires a clear to its user rationale for why decisions are being taken. The latter reduces to an essentially random and contingent selection of sources and materials, and to an avoidance of information. The former is a good solution to perceived overload. The latter is unlikely to be effective where the information carries any real significance for its users, life, work, or study. Cook in 2017 points to the danger of bad satisficing in relation to problems of post-truth and alternative facts, and in particular to the spreading of fake news. What is your opinion about fake news? Have you ever been trapped by any fake news, something that you believed, and then you find out that it was something that just was randomly spread on the internet? What is the most shocking or absurd fake news you encountered back in the day? Or also a historical piece of fake news that affected a century ago, or also like entire village or historically random fact that might be like really interesting for us to read. Put that in the comments. So thank you so much for being here and see you in better said talk to you in another video. Bye bye.